I understand that. Are you aware of programs that are likely to come to a stop because of lack of funding, particularly HUSAR?
I'm aware that people have expressed concern about the need to find funding to keep them operating, but I've not had anybody tell me specifically that a certain program will stop at a certain point of time. It's a general kind of an issue that has been raised.
A broad issue.
You're right, a general issue, broad issue, but not a specific program, a specific problem hasn't been identified. It's a general one where people say that, just as we're discussing, that the ongoing funding is a problem.
And is this a concern to the federal government?
I believe it is, yes.
And are there steps underway to address the concern?
In and among a number of things that we would have as budgetary pressures, it would be one.
Radio communications interoperability strategy. Can you provide the committee with some background information about that?
It's one of my colleagues that actually manages a unit around interoperability, and there is a specific project that they are working on with respect to secret communications, which is one element of interoperability, but that is primarily directed towards an effort within the federal government. That is an effort that is directed within the federal government, and it's a project that's underway that we're working on to try to achieve secure communication channel among federal government departments. But beyond that, I'm not aware of a specific program that we're working on.
James Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, let's talk about the collaborative approach where his government has left police infrastructure dollars at zero for a region that covers 2/3 of Ontario.
Unreal.
Now, police officers are at risk as a result of this policy, and our communities are at risk because of this policy. 2 years ago, I attended the funeral of the two young men who burnt to death in a makeshift jail cell in Saskatchewan, and they died in conditions that would not be acceptable in any community in this country. So I'll ask the minister again, why is he continuing to perpetuate a two-tier standard for public safety in our communities?
Hear, hear. Honourable Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, the person posing the question obviously has no understanding of the fact that these agreements, Mr. Speaker, work at a local level. They involve the province, they involve the federal government, they involve requests by those who are in the particular area. And I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, he obviously is clearly unaware of the amount of resources that we have increased across the board for policing, not just
and a number of 17 or more civilian deaths at the hands of Blackwater guards before you could finally get him here?
That's a good question for us, but it's also a good question for the State Department. Why did all those people, innocent Iraqis, get killed by people from Blackwater, which obviously has had to have an impact on the Iraqi people when they see a private military that they don't distinguish between our regular military. They just know Iraqi civilians are getting killed by American military people, and the ones in charge at the State Department, the only thing they thought to do was to try to cover up the killings.
Mr. Prince, you do admit that Blackwater personnel have shot and killed innocent civilians, don't you?
No, sir. I disagree with that. I think there's been times when guys are using defensive force to protect themselves, to protect the package they're trying to get away from danger. There could be ricochets. There are traffic accidents. Yes, this is war. Since 2005, we've conducted in excess of 16,000 missions in Iraq, in 195 incidences with weapons discharge. in that time, did a ricochet hurt or kill an innocent person? That's entirely possible. But again, we do not have the luxury of staying behind to do that terrorist crime scene investigation to figure out what happened.
Were you satisfied with Eric Prince's responses?
He gave a very self-serving testimony to us. I can understand that that's what he wanted to do. That was in his interest to do it. But I don't think he was responsive or was willing to ever acknowledge that there were problems. And there were very serious problems with Blackwater in Iraq.
Yet Blackwater's still getting millions of dollars in government contracts. And just a couple of weeks ago, they hired a big lobbying firm here in Washington to go after more contracts. What does that say to you?
Now they want to do more private intelligence gathering. Well, I don't know. We've had enough problems with intelligence by the CIA, but at least they're accountable to us. I'm not sure what it's going to mean for Blackwater being the agency to get intelligence for the U.S. government.
Yeah, if you go back to your district and you go down to the local diner or the cafe and you have a cup of coffee and a guy sitting there and he says to you, Congressman Waxman, I mean, what do you make of Blackwater? I mean, what's your answer?
Well, I don't understand why we're contracting out military operations for this country. A soldier that's working for Blackwater is answerable to Blackwater, which is answerable to its shareholders. American soldiers are answerable to the Constitution and the American people.
The State Department is contracting out huge construction projects in Iraq as well. One such contractor, called First Kuwaiti, has a reputation that is hair-raising. Is it true that the State Department in Iraq hired a Kuwaiti company that's under investigation for kickbacks and bribery as well as using slave labor?
It's true. And they had information about it, and should have known about it, and yet they went ahead with the contract anyway. And that's the company that did such a terrible job on building this new embassy in Baghdad.
With no competitive bidding, the State Department gave First Kuwaiti $600 million to build the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad, the largest and most expensive embassy in the world. This American fortress is now behind schedule and over budget to the tune of an additional $144 million. But that seems almost mundane compared to the testimony of Rory Mayberry, an American medic hired by First Kuwaiti.
I believe I am one of only a few Americans that have recently worked on the site of the new embassy in Baghdad. My impressions about how the construction was being managed left me incredibly disturbed.
Mayberry described how he boarded a plane in Kuwait City along with 51 Filipino laborers who thought they were heading for hotel jobs in Dubai.
Well, Mr. Chairman, when the airplane took off and the captain announced that we were headed to Baghdad, all you-know-what broke out on the airplane. The men started shouting. It wasn't until the security guy working for First Kuwaiti waved an MP5 in the air that the men settled down. They realized that they had no other choice but to go to Baghdad. Let me spell it out clearly. I believe these men were kidnapped by First Kuwaiti to work on the U.S. Embassy. They had no ID, no passports, and were being smuggled past U.S. security forces. I had a trailer all to myself on the green zone, but they were packed 25 to 30 a trailer, and every day they went out to work on the construction of the embassy without proper safety equipment. I saw guys without shoes, without gloves, no safety harnesses, and on scaffolding 30 feet off of the ground. Their toes were wrapped around the rebar like a bunch of birds.
Despite being paid $500 million in U.S. funds, First Kuwaiti refused to send an official to testify.
They want information that might be of use to the Taliban, Mr. Speaker. Operational matters, as the General Hillier has said.